It's not every day your peaceful afternoon gets interrupted by a call to the cops, especially when you've got a secret of your own. But that's exactly what happened when a local HOA Karen decided to call the authorities on me. Little did she know, I'm actually part of a much bigger world than she could have ever imagined. I'm DEA, and the story I'm about to tell you, it's more than just a neighborhood dispute. Now, I know what you're thinking. How did an HOA complaint turn into something way more intense? Well, it's all about who you know and who you don't. Turns out, her nephew was already on our radar, and not for anything good. I've been tracking him for a while, and to be honest, this whole situation got a whole lot messier than I ever expected. Imagine the look on her face when she realized that the very person she called the cops on had been watching her nephew for weeks. Trust me, things went south fast, and I had to make some decisions I wasn't prepared for. But what happened next? You won't believe it. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over, and it's about to take a turn no one saw coming. So, let me take you back a bit. I wasn't just your average neighbor. I kept to myself, worked long hours, and rarely interacted with anyone unless I had to. But there was always this weird energy with Karen. She was the kind of person who had a problem with everything: what color your house was painted, how high your grass was, even how you parked your car. I learned pretty quickly to avoid her, but that wasn't always possible, especially when you're living in a neighborhood with an HOA that's ready to call the cops over the smallest thing. Now, when she called the cops on me that day, I was a little taken aback. I figured it was just another one of her petty complaints, maybe about the fence I was fixing. But then I saw the officer's eyes as he looked at me. Something wasn't right. There was hesitation, like he wasn't sure if he should have been there in the first place. He wasn't here for a routine complaint. He was here because she had said something that didn't quite add up. It wasn't just a noise dispute. And that's when the penny dropped. I knew her nephew, or at least, I knew *of him. This wasn't just a random call. She had no clue that I had been tracking him for weeks now. The whole situation was getting darker, and I could feel it. What she didn't know was that I had a job to do, and it was far more important than any neighborhood squabble. The tension in the air was thick, and I could see the officer trying to piece things together. He didn't know the full story, not by a long shot, but I could tell he was starting to pick up on something. Karen, on the other hand, was practically shaking with indignation, ranting about how unreasonable I was, like I was the one causing a scene. Meanwhile, I stayed calm, too calm, maybe. I wasn't about to spill the details of what was really going on, not right then. As the cops started asking questions, Karen kept pushing the narrative that I was in the wrong. She had this self-righteous energy, like she was used to getting away with whatever she wanted in this neighborhood, but it felt different now. With every word she said, I kept thinking about her nephew, how I had been watching him from the shadows for weeks, gathering intel, piecing together his involvement in something much bigger than a simple local crime. I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen had no clue what her nephew had been up to, or maybe she didn't want to know. I knew the kind of people he was connected with, people who didn't play by the rules, people who had their hands in some really dangerous business. And now I was standing in front of her, holding a secret she wouldn't even begin to understand. The officer, trying to remain neutral, asked me a few more questions about the fence dispute, but I could tell he was distracted. His mind was racing, clearly not buying Karen's version of events. I had to make a choice. Do I just let this blow over, or do I take the risk and confront Karen with the truth? But then I realized, if I did that, the whole situation could blow up in my face, and not just for me, but for her nephew too. The stakes had just gotten a lot higher. The more Karen talked, the more I could feel the walls closing in. It was like she was digging herself deeper with every word. She kept repeating the same things: how I was a bad neighbor, how I had disrespected her, and how I was somehow the one who was breaking the rules. But there was something in the way she spoke that made me uneasy. It was almost as if she was trying too hard to convince the officer. Was she hiding something? Or was she just playing the part of the victim too well? I glanced at the officer again. He wasn't saying much now, But I could see the gears turning in his head. He had started asking Karen more pointed questions, ones that made her uneasy. The thing was, I knew exactly how these kinds of people worked. They were experts at manipulation. They could twist the truth, turn things around, make themselves look innocent while dragging everyone else through the mud. And Karen, she was no different. My mind was racing, thinking about what to do next. I didn't have much time. If I didn't act fast, the whole situation could spiral out of control. The officer was starting to look at me differently, like he was putting the pieces together, but Karen was still throwing out accusations. I knew that if I didn't speak up, everything would start to unravel. But if I did, I'd be revealing far more than I'd planned. I kept glancing over at the officer, watching his expression shift from confusion to suspicion. It was clear he was starting to realize there was more to this than just a simple HOA dispute. That's when Karen's tone shifted. She suddenly stopped, her eyes narrowing, like she'd just figured something out. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was staring at the officer, like she was waiting for him to make a move. My heart was pounding. The silence between us grew heavy, charged. I could feel it. The tipping point was coming. The officer was on the edge of asking something that would change everything. And then, just as I thought he might finally break through, Karen's nephew called. The phone buzzed loudly in her pocket, cutting through the tension like a knife. She glanced down, her face flickering with something I couldn't quite place. Fear? Panic? But she answered it anyway, her voice shaking as she said, "What is it?" The moment she picked up, I knew things were about to take a dangerous turn. What was her nephew telling her? And how would she react now? As Karen held the phone to her ear, I watched her expression shift. Her hands started to tremble, her face turning pale. The sudden change was too sharp to ignore. She wasn't just talking to her nephew anymore, she was listening, really listening like she was getting news she hadn't expected. The room seemed to freeze for a moment. Even the officer, who had been trying to stay neutral, now looked more alert, his gaze darting between Karen and me. I don't know, Karen stammered, her voice unsteady. How is that possible? Her eyes flicked over to me, sharp with a mixture of panic and confusion. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Something had just hit her, and whatever it wasn't good. I took a step forward, my instincts kicking in. The conversation on the other end of the line seemed to be getting worse by the second. Whatever was being said on that call had pushed Karen to the edge. And then, the words she spoke next made everything click. "Tell them to wait she said, her voice low but filled with an edge I hadn't heard before. "I need to handle this." A cold chill ran down my spine. Handle this was not a phrase you used lightly. I knew right then that things were about to get far more complicated than I'd ever anticipated. Whatever her nephew had done, whatever she had been keeping hidden, it was worse than I thought. The officer, still standing there with his notebook open, finally broke the silence. "What's going on here, ma'am?" he asked, his voice growing firmer, sensing that something wasn't right. But Karen was already backing away, almost as if she was trying to distance herself from the situation. She dropped the phone into her bag and looked at me with wide eyes. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of fear in her demeanor. Real fear, not the kind of fear you fake when you're playing the victim. "You don't know what you're dealing with," she whispered, almost to herself, but loud enough for me to hear. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't even have time to respond. The officer's radio crackled to life, cutting through the tension. His eyes widened as he listened, his hand tightening around the receiver. "We've got a situation," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone in the room. I could see it now. This wasn't just about a petty neighborhood complaint anymore. This wasn't even about Karen. This was about something far bigger, something that was spiraling out of control, and I had just stepped right into the middle of it. The officer's hand shook slightly as he held the radio to his ear. I could see the color drain from his face as he listened to the voice on the other end. Whatever news he was receiving, it was hitting him harder than anything I'd seen so far. Karen's face was now a mix of disbelief and dread. She was completely unraveling, no longer the self-assured, entitled woman who'd called the cops on me just moments ago. Now she was backing toward the door, like she needed to escape, as if whatever was happening next was something she couldn't face. "Ma'am, what's going on?" the officer asked again, more urgently this time. I knew the tension was building to a breaking point. Everything I'd been dreading was coming to a head. The officer turned to me, his expression darkening. "You're part of this, aren't you? This isn't just a simple HOA issue, is it?" Before I could answer, Karen snapped, "You need to leave. All of you." Her voice cracked with panic. She was completely unraveling now, but it wasn't just fear. It was something darker, something deeper. She wasn't just worried about her nephew anymore. Something was about to happen, something that would change everything. The officer, now visibly shaken, started backing away from her. "Listen, I don't know what this is about, but we need to get this cleared up," he said, trying to remain calm. But he wasn't even looking at her anymore. He was focused on me now, like he finally understood what was at stake. The truth was starting to emerge, and it wasn't pretty. Just as I was about to step forward and finally lay everything on the table, the front door slammed open behind us. We all froze. A tall figure stepped inside, wearing dark sunglasses, his stance rigid with authority. It wasn't the usual backup. I knew who he was immediately, Agent Carter. I had worked with him before, and suddenly, everything clicked. Karen's eyes widened in sheer panic as she saw him, and I could almost hear her mind racing. She knew who he was too. He wasn't just law enforcement. He was someone much higher up, and he wasn't here for a small-time case. The pieces fell into place. I wasn't the only one tracking her nephew. Carter had been following him too, and he was much closer to the heart of whatever criminal operation had been going on. Carter walked straight past Karen without a word, his gaze never leaving me. "We need to talk," he said, his voice cool and calculated. Karen's voice cracked as she lunged toward him. "You don't understand. You can't. This is my family. She was cut off by the sharp sound of a phone ringing. The officer pulled his phone out, looked at it, and his face dropped even further. It's from headquarters." He looked at me and then at Carter. "We've got a problem." I was about to ask what the hell was going on when Carter's phone buzzed too. He glanced down and exhaled sharply. Without looking at anyone else, he nodded toward the officer. "It's over." Suddenly, everything seemed to hit all at once. The officer's face was full of realization. Karen was frozen, her mouth hanging open as she struggled to grasp the full weight of what was happening. Her nephew wasn't just a small-time player in a local gang. He was a key part of something much bigger. And Karen, caught in the middle, was either a willing accomplice or had been manipulated into believing she could control it. Carter stepped forward, addressing both Karen and the officer now. "You're both in deeper than you realize. And trust me, the web's already closing in." Karen's face went white as the truth began to sink in. Her life, her family, everything she thought she understood, was falling apart. The reality was harsh, but there was no escaping it.